I've been telling the story of the time that I spent on Badger Yard at San Quentin, the classification yard. You see, I had been convicted of a serious crime and sentenced to a long prison sentence in Mendocino County. I was transferred from the Mendocino County Jail to Badger Section to be classified and would eventually be moved to High Desert State Prison, where I would serve a large portion of my term. However, after 3 weeks at Badger Section, the situation was becoming complex. It hadn't taken Ty long to adjust to his new role as big man on campus. He was reveling in being liked by the other inmates, especially the cool inmates, as it were. He was eating meals at the table with Sam and Filthy, and he was walking around with a smug air, a strut, as if he felt that he'd really been accepted and made it in prison culture. The first yard that we had after Ty had found his place amongst the shot callers, he came over to me near the end of the yard, and I'm sure that he thought that he was being subtle and politely working the conversation around to the subject, but it felt abrupt and even a little aggressive. He asked me with his little manic half-laugh, "So Aaron, who's the shot caller for the Mendocino car anyway? Filthy and I were talking, and I just wanted to know." The fact that the question had come from Filthy was not really surprising. I'd always felt that he didn't really like me. I didn't have a strong opinion about him one way or the other as an inmate, but as a person, he kind of scared me. He struck me as the type of person who was unstable, erratic, and would revel in violence, as somebody who woke up hoping he'd get to hurt somebody that day. I told Ty, the Mendocino car, who's the shot caller for the Mendocino car? Ty, the Mendocino car is me, you, Shotgun Steve, who just wants to be left alone and barely talks to anybody, and Chief Broom, who couldn't talk to anybody for more than about a minute at a time if he tried, because he is so meted out. There isn't a Mendocino car, man. He thought for a second, and it was obvious he was trying to get around to a point, because he said, "Well, yeah, but Filthy and I were talking, and somebody should be in charge. Is it you? Are you in charge?" I couldn't do any more of this. I told him, "Look, Ty, the Mendocino car fits in a car. There's really only a couple of us, and if you want to know who's in charge, don't ask me. Go ask Sam. He can decide who's in charge, because I don't give a crap, man. I'm out here doing my burpees, doing my time, and that's what you should be doing, too, man." He laughed and went back to the primary workout group to kick it with Filthy and Sam. I've mentioned Filthy a couple of times, but I've left out just this important detail about the guy. You see, he had more body alteration than any other inmate that I met in the course of my incarceration, I think. He'd gotten himself a thin piece of metal, like a guitar string, and he had split his tongue. He had pushed the guitar string through his tongue, taken a piece of dental floss, and all the way out until his tongue split. He had an incredible number of tattoos. He didn't look like the tattooed man at the circus, but it was clear that he was trying. It was his long-term goal, because the places he had work done, it was tight work. It was everywhere was tattooed with tiny little things. It wasn't necessarily good work, if we're being honest. The ink was poor and a lot of it looked sloppy, but he had a lot of tattoos. He'd taken that same guitar string and given himself about a dozen facial piercings, and he just really looked like somebody who'd put a lot of time and effort into being offensive. He had racist tattoos, Nazi tattoos, demonic tattoos. I really think he just sat down and made a list of things that would offend people and then told whoever was tattooing him, "Hey, put these on me." I asked him one day, Hey, Filthy, that's a lot of work you've had done, man. And the tongue and the eyebrows. How long did it take to do all that? I'd expected him to say years. He was in on a parole violation. He had spent about 2 weeks in county jail, and he had spent about 6 weeks there at the reception center at Badger Section. He told me he hadn't had one tattoo or one piercing whenever he got arrested. I believe his exact words were, "Wow, my mom's gonna freak out when she sees me." Being as how he was only 21 and no mother reasonably expects their son to split their tongue at random, I think he was right. I bet she was freaked out when she eventually saw him. The yard recalled, and I went back to my cell to spend the 14 hours of isolation, silence, and loneliness. There's a long time between afternoon yard and breakfast. There's dinner in that time period, but dinner lasts 20 minutes. This is a long time between afternoon program where you're just alone. About 8 p.m. that night, as I was really settling in with that solitude and just going crazy with the thoughts in my head after 3 full weeks of being locked in this little cell with no cellie, they brought me a new cellie. I was ecstatic. I shook his hand and helped him get his stuff into the cell. I introduced myself. His name was Tony. He was in on credit card fraud and about 40 years old and had done a couple of terms but on lower security yards. I could tell we were going to get along, and I was just so happy to have anybody to talk to. Because isolation wears on you. Loneliness wears on you. We're social creatures. We're not meant to just be in a box, constantly alert, trusting nobody. It makes you less as a person. It eats away at your sense of self. To have Tony in the cell to talk about my life and his life, it was incredible. It was like a breath of fresh air. That type of thing, being able to talk to somebody openly and honestly and just relax, you can't put a price on that. And it's so easy to take the people in our life for granted. If you have one person you can talk to or 100 people you can talk to, regardless, take a moment and imagine that cell. Toilet, bed, sink, door. That's all you have. 1 day, 2 day, a week, 3 weeks locked in that little room just alone and quiet. The thoughts bounce off your skull and you're just so tense. Now imagine that same 3 weeks, but with one person. You can pick the person. It's so different. You have somebody to talk to. Take that person. Make sure that they know how much they mean to you. Because it's not just 3 weeks locked in a cell. It's our whole lives we can go through alone without really connecting people if we're not careful.